mother, please. Mother, please, don't do this, don't do this. Put down your life with it, God, but don't do this.
Welcome to Very Scary People. I'm Donnie Wahlberg. The Reverend Jim Jones is the darling of politicians and Hollywood stars. By the mid-1970s, the People's Temple has grown to over 1,000 devout followers. But terrified by his erratic behavior, members of the group begin to turn on the church, telling stories of sexual and financial abuse. Now, reporters are looking into the truth behind Jones' dark sunglasses. In an attempt to maintain control, Jim Jones is about to make a horrifying decision.
The People's Temple and Jim Jones made their headquarters here in Ukiah, about 100 miles north of San Francisco. In 1971, Jones began to spread out. His religion was a mix of faith healing and revelations with radical politics.
Yes. Here comes the woman healed of cancer. Here she comes.
He's doing fraudulent things. He's a chameleon. He can see what he needs to be, and he becomes that.
Many former temple members to speak out about what was happening inside.
One woman wrote him a love letter saying, I love you, I want to be with you, I'll always follow you.
He led the group in mocking her naked body.
Jones was intimidating the congregation with beatings and threats.
Jim was pointing a gun at me, and he said, I'm going to shoot you.
There were a couple of times me walking in on him with a man or a woman in bed.
He said he was doing it for the cause when really he was exploiting people sexually.
He turns to drugs. That just increases his paranoia, and he is more and more deceptive to his followers. And Jones announces there's a treat. Everyone have a cup of wine.
We all drank it.
He announces it's poison.
It was really a test, grooming us for what was going to happen on November 18th.
That's why I have Jesus' blood. There's only one blood.
On October 4th, 1976, Bob Houston, a former prominent member of the People's Temple, died under mysterious circumstances.
Bob Houston was in People's Temple with his wife Phyllis and their 2 children, and he left the temple. He fell off the train and was killed.
The authorities didn't know whether it was accident or suicide or something more sinister.
And it turned out his father had been a college friend of Congressman Ryan.
He contacted Leo Ryan, who was his member of Congress, and asked Ryan, would you look into this?
Ryan was very garrulous. He had a reputation of being sort of a maverick guy who liked crusades.
He was what I call an experiential legislator. He didn't just take a bureaucrat's word for anything. He wanted to find out himself. He had a vast number of constituents who had younger loved ones who had gotten involved in the People's Temple. So he took it upon himself to start looking into it.
But by now, Ryan wasn't the only one looking into the People's Temple.
A major expose was announced by New West magazine on Jones and the People's Temple.
You always got the sense that everybody knew there was something off here, but no one certainly wanted to talk about it. It got me curious.
On August 1st, 1977, the article was released.
It had everything in it, from the beatings to all the property people give up to the millions of dollars that Jones had stashed in foreign accounts, all the laws that were being broken. And it was great reporting.
He could easily find enemies that he could drop that kind of a story on who are bizarre enough to believe it.
And they're going to get him. his followers will leave him. So pretty much on the spot, he wants to move himself and the bulk of People's Temple someplace where they can't get at him.
And before anyone knew it, he was on his way to Guyana. He has never returned.
There's also Jim Jones's pride. He's chased out of California under humiliating circumstances. Then, by God, he is going to make Jonestown such a socialist triumph.
I left. I got ready to get on the plane, and I just kind of looked back and I said, I just feel like this is the last time I'm going to ever see you guys again.
Tell them God's gonna cut them down.
In August 1977, after an unfavorable article was released about the People's Temple, Jones, who felt he had a lot of enemies, felt the only way he'd keep his followers loyal to him was to move them to South America, to Guyana.
So now Jones is going to make their entire world Jonestown.
Can you imagine that there wasn't any heaven and you're going to have to build it?
You know, going to the promised land, land of milk and honey.
I came down approximately a year in advance of the big push, when it became clear that Dad intended to move the entire organization. And we built most of what you see in any image of Jonestown. And I had an amazing time doing it.
By the time I went to live in Jonestown in 1978, there were probably 700 people.
As you pull up to the settlement, you hear over the loudspeakers, the new members are here and whatnot, and people start, yay, clapping and running over to meet you.
I left the church in 76, I think. But because my kids were in, it was kind of hard to stay out. We went over to Guyana in July of 1978 because the kids were scheduled to go, and so I went over with them. At the time, it was what they wanted. It kept them off the streets, so I figured, they'll grow up, they'll grow out of it.
It's the interior of the South American jungle, and it is very, very beautiful. Very tall trees, you have toucans, there was a pavilion, there was a kitchen area. It was quite a city in the middle of the jungle.
They had these little cottages. It was kind of like a glorified tent, but it was built nicely. They had school for the kids. They had a pavilion where I guess they had programs every once in a while. Everybody seemed to be happy.
These are honey and coffee, cans of various syrups, and you can see the bleach. And these are all various different types of fruits, ketchup. Here's a Milo, an extremely good drink that is unique to Guyana.
As is the pattern with Jim Jones, the beautiful surface is just a facade for the darkness that lurks below.
You never plan your death? You're gonna die. Don't you think you should plan about such an important event?
He and I argued quite a bit, publicly, in Jonestown. Very few revered my father. If any, they feared him.
The first thing that I saw when I approached the pavilion was Jim Jones sitting in his chair, his throne, and a security guard on each side with rifles, which was quite an escalation. And the pavilion was surrounded with security guards with weapons. Right away, I wanted to leave.
He was starting to get more paranoid. Jim says, listen, from now on, your everyday job is to be my personal security 24 hours a day. As long as I'm outside of my house, you guys are to be around me at all times.
We surrendered our passports, surrendered any cash that we may have had.
Of the nearly 1,000 members at Jonestown, nearly a third were children. About another third were elderly people, many of them women.
They have pension checks, Social Security. The money can start to add up. There are expenses in running a big operation like this, no doubt.
Jonestown had a steady income of about $39,000 a month.
The idea that they had found some sort of a paradise in Guyana lasted only a short time.
You know, we weren't growing enough food, so we had to buy all the food, almost all the food, to feed 1,000 people 3 meals a day.
It's very difficult to farm jungle soils.
Jonestown was a mirage as an operation. They had too many people, too few places to sleep or live. Jones himself was in worse and worse health. It was very much running on fumes.
I worked in the fields. I worked in the orchard crew, and I woke up in the morning, went for breakfast, which consisted of rice and gravy, and we worked until lunch and had rice with gravy and went to work until it was time for sundown. So I was like skeletal.
I got ready to get on the plane, and I just kind of looked back and I said, I just feel like this is the last time I'm gonna ever see you guys again.
There was no religious services whatsoever. It was all political. Jim Jones spoke over 24 hours a day.
Attention, attention.
Attention, attention, attention.
News of the day, the only news that we get.
And we listened to his bemoaning the state of affairs and the enemy and how they're out there in the jungle waiting for us.
That's how treacherous the goddamn infamous bastards are. It doesn't seem to be much true socialism. Everybody's bowing to United States imperialism, but by God, we won't.
It was just like the Gestapo. I mean, under Hitler, that if somebody was negative about the Third Reich, they would be disciplined for having negative thoughts, and they would be turned in.
Our children were so mind-controlled. They believed that Jim Jones was a prophet. We were even afraid to tell them we were leaving because we were afraid they'd turn on us.
A few members escaped, calling Jonestown a virtual slave camp. Back in California, relatives were becoming increasingly concerned about what was taking place in Guyana.
You're under the supervision of the authority that's there, and that's Jones.
Now get your ass up here or you will regret it. I'll do with you what I want to do with you.
It was a life and death situation.
Families and former members back in California began meeting as a group. They called themselves the Concerned Relatives.
They wanted to make sure that they were okay because you couldn't call them and you couldn't really write them a letter because someone else would probably read it first to see what they were saying.
One of the people making a lot of noise was Grace Stone, the mother of Jones's 5-year-old son, who was back at the camp in Guyana.
The concerned relatives began filing lawsuits for the custody of John Victor Stone.
In Guyana, the news of the court filing rocked Jim Jones.
He left the United States. He couldn't go back there for fear of being prosecuted, possibly going to jail. He didn't want that to happen. Then his lawyers would tell him, you can't even leave the gates, the entrance of Jonestown, because somebody could legally just arrest you there. You better stay right inside of Jonestown.
If he was paranoid before, he really had reason to be this time.
Tim and Grace, on their life. Tim and Grace come in here to get their brains blown out.
There was a moment in September of 1977 when a custody order was made in Guyana seeking to obtain custody of John Victor Stone, whom everyone in Jonestown believed to be the biological son of Jim Jones.
A judge there ordered Jones to appear in court. He was livid.
They came to believe that the concerned relatives were seeking to destroy their community.
It is a frightening situation to behold. So obviously we, with over 800 here, become prime target.
Jones continued making threats of revolutionary suicide, calling it the White Night.
A white night was like an emergency calling, like a 911 call.
Now get your ass up here or you will regret it. I'll do with you what I want to do with you.
And everyone's was to report to the pavilion immediately. Jones would tell us the latest life and death emergency that was happening and how our community was threatened. And the only choice we had was to commit revolutionary suicide.
The conversation was going to be live or die. And I got to my mother first and I says, I don't care what he says, don't argue with him. I want to see him squirm, because I never believed Dad would go through with it.
We got devices that can shoot 150 yards. Don't with us. We're in a war council. Would you like for us to die?
Certainly it was psychologically abusive, emotionally abusive.
I was in Dad's face about it, and he said, you're just afraid to die. And here I am, this 19-year-old kid who has, I feel, put my ass on the line for my town. This man that I thought the most cowardly being I'd ever known was accusing me of being afraid to die. And I'm screaming at him that I'm afraid to die, and I actually take out a pistol, cock it, and ram it up against my chin. Just a twitch away from blowing my brains out. And Dad gets a revolver from somebody, and he puts it in his mouth, uncocked. It's a revolver, and that's a long pull away from doing any harm. But here we are screaming at each other, you know, about who's afraid to die.
Back in San Francisco, the concerned relatives were putting pressure on the media and Congressman Ryan to do something.
In November, right after the election, he's going to go over. He's going to see for himself. He'll bring with him the media, local reporters, someone from the Washington Post, and a crack film crew from NBC, and even some of the concerned relatives. And they will go to Jonestown, and they will demand to be let in.
Leo Ryan never asked for security protection. It seems that he believed that he would be protected by the news media, and the news media believed that they would be protected by being with the U.S. congressperson.
He certainly felt that he was doing something that no one else was willing to do. The conditions of the People's Temple in San Francisco, the defectors who left the church before Jim Jones went to Jonestown, talked about many of these abuses, sexual abuse, child abuse, physical abuse, and so he wanted to protect his constituents.
What they don't know is after the White Night, some months earlier, where Jones said there was poison and there wasn't, he had directed Dr. Larry Schott to buy 1 full pound of cyanide powder, and that's enough for 1,800 lethal doses.
It was pretty bad. I was in terror.
What are we going to do? We're going to commit revolutionary suicide?
Welcome back to Very Scary People. On November 15th, 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan arrives in Georgetown, Guyana. With him are 17 members of the concerned relatives, 2 staffers, and 9 members of the media. The plan is to talk to the people of Jonestown and to Jim Jones himself to determine if people are free to leave or are prisoners in Jones' twisted paradise. It would take days for the congressman's group to get into Jonestown, and several of them would never get out.
The temple's strategy was to basically stall and to try to keep us out of Jonestown. We mysteriously had problems with our passports. The U.S. Embassy was somewhat helpless to get us in there.
I know there was a lot of back and forth, and I think at some point it became, we're coming whether or not you say we can.
There was intense preparation, intense drilling. questions.
When they refer to me, what would you call me?
Jim.
When you were to say thank you, how will you say it?
The answers were all the same. Oh, we love it here. Couldn't have been happier.
You know, his sons and I, we were in Georgetown playing basketball.
We were all on a team, and a trip was planned for us to go in and do some scrimmaging with the national team of Guyana and then play in some Guyanese tournaments where local club teams played.
Building up to that point when we left, you could sense a shift in the morale of our fellow members there in Jonestown, like they kind of didn't want us to leave, as if we kind of made people feel safe there.
In retrospect, clearer eyes would have known that was not a time to leave. But I also wanted to just get away from the craziness. And Mom was always trying to get us clear of my father and the madness.
We arrived in Jonestown on the evening of November 17th, 1978. When we got to the gates, we were really elated, and there were hundreds of people around.
Perhaps the most high-profile person entering Jonestown, aside from Congressman Ryan, was NBC News correspondent Don Harris. Harris had earned the nickname Mr. Lucky because he had had several close calls while reporting in Vietnam.
Introduction to Jim Jones was really the most sobering thing because he appeared to be sallow and weak, but what struck me was that this entire community was in the hands of this man who appeared to be ill.
There's a lavish dinner provided for them. There's pork, there's greens, there's even dessert.
And we got an opportunity to interview him during a dinner. When you asked him a question, it would just take off on tangents. A lot of it came across as paranoia. And he also railed against the press and said, "You don't need to shoot me. Your words have that effect."
Then that evening there was a performance by the singers and the dancers. Congressman Ryan gave his famous speech.
I can tell you right now that from the few conversations I've had with some of the folks here already this evening, that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them in their whole life.
And the applause just burst out and continued to thunder. It went on for an uncomfortably long period of time.
If you really listen to it, there's a frantic desperation in that.
They had to convince him of their loyalty.
I passed a note to one of the newspaper reporters. I wrote on the note, "Vernon Gosney, Monica Bagby, help us get out of Jonestown." He dropped the note, and this little boy said, "Oh, he passed a note, he passed a note." I was dead.
Jim Jones is now very well aware that at least some people are going to want to go.
Don Harris showed the note to Congressman Ryan, so he approached me after the event, and he said, you're the first asked to leave. You will have the first seats on the plane.
Ryan made a plan. They were going to come back the next morning and take with them anyone who wanted to leave.
Congressman Ryan couldn't comprehend the danger he was in at all. He would say, you have the congressional shield of protection over you. Like he was bequeathing me this protection that he himself didn't have. I was in terror the next day. I thought it was all over for me.
We returned to Jonestown at Saturday. More and more people had come forward. They wanted to leave, and the mood of the place turned extremely dark. And then suddenly the skies turned dark and a wind whipped up and torrential rain came down. It was almost like an omen.
Ultimately, 15 people want to go. Things are turning ugly.
I'm walking down this pathway, and a mother is screaming, pulling the child one way, the father screaming, pulling the child the other way, and I was stunned by it. I recognized that we were in a powder keg.
Jones was just licking his lips and sucking his cheeks in and out. You could see how nervous he was getting. At the very end of the visit, Don Harris actually confronted Jim Jones with the note on camera.
Last night, someone came and passed me this note.
As a journalist, he was looking for that moment. You know, okay, Jim, here's the note.
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about lies? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us.
Don Harris showing him that note ensured that he would definitely be killed, because he just humiliated Jim Jones on camera.
So we boarded a large dump truck. The last defector in that line was Larry Layton. He was a longtime church member and a trusted Jones aide, whom the defectors feared wasn't really one of them. And then there was this tremendously loud cheer from the pavilion.
Ryan is jumped from behind by a man named Don Sly, who has a knife, screaming that, "I'm going to kill you, you're going to die."
Temple members quickly pulled Don Sly off of Congressman Ryan, and in the process, Sly's hand got cut, and Congressman Ryan ended up with a lot of blood on his shirt.
A short time later, Congressman Ryan was escorted to the truck, and he was looking rather shaken and ashen.
And then we started to leave Jonestown. And at that moment, I am sure that Congressman Ryan knew the danger he was in. Someone had just attempted to kill him.
Jim has a plan for what's going to happen back at the airstrip.
I never thought I was ever going to really leave. There was a really strong sense of foreboding.
Many of our traders are dead. They're all laying out their dead.
I saw people who had been wounded and people who were dead.
On November 18, 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan left Jonestown with members of his staff, members of the media, and 16 defectors from the People's Temple.
I noticed that Larry Layton skirted the frisking that Congressman Ryan did and went around the other side of the plane and boarded it.
As they were getting ready to board the larger plane, Don Harris wanted to do a quick interview with the congressman.
I don't know, but what he said was he intended to kill me.
A number of us felt that there was some trouble ahead. Don Harris and others were on high alert.
It's a matter now of just kind of falling back and regrouping and seeing what we have.
And they look, and here's the tractor coming, and the men on it are armed. The NBC cameraman very bravely keeps his camera running.
I sprinted for the far side of the plane. I got hit, got shot.
That's when I looked out the window and said, "They're killing everyone." And I turned, and Larry Layton shot me 3 times.
Knowing I was in a place where there was no shelter, sprinted for the jungle.
And I ran until I got to the edge of the runway, and I collapsed on the ground. I saw blood all over, and I just thought, well, I'm dying, and passed out.
I continued to hear some gunfire. It was more slow and deliberate gunfire.
I turned around. Congressman Ryan had been hit, and there was blood coming out of his neck. And I started to move towards him, and then he was shot again and fell. And I ran under the plane and hid behind a wheel. And then the shots just kept ringing out, and I was playing dead with my head down. And then all of a sudden I was hit, and I was shot 5 times.
When the gunfire stopped entirely, I worked my way out to the edge of the jungle, and I saw people who had been wounded and people who were dead. Congressman Ryan was dead. Don Harris was dead, and there were wounded people, some of them in really serious condition, like Jackie Spear.
5 people are dead at the scene. The others are critically wounded. They're left there, not knowing if someone's going to kill them off or if someone's coming back to help them.
Back at Jonestown, Jones called a meeting and called everybody to the pavilion.
They all gather in. Jones is up on stage, but they notice something that's different because there's guards with guns all along the perimeter.
Can't take all the people's children without expecting a violent reaction. But they can't live in peace, they will die in peace.
And he said, life will never be the same. We've killed a congressman. He made everybody complicit.
The government's going to blame us, and they're going to come parachuting in here, and they're going to kill all of us, even the children. And what we need to do is we need to make this gesture.
This is a revolutionary suicide. This is not a self-destructive suicide. They brought this upon us, and they'll pay for that.
And that was the call of death.
That's when they called Georgetown, where I was, saying that everybody was killing themselves in Jonestown.
We got the message that orders had been sent that we were to get revenge. And that message back was clear signal to us that something terrible was happening. Things were going farther and much worse than had ever happened before.
He said, we're gonna all kill ourselves.
I'm like, no, we're not doing that. He gave us those final orders, and he got off a radio, and there was radio silence.
It was a harrowing night of trying to find out what the heck was going on.
And so we go down to the police station, and we're asking questions, and the police officers there really can't tell us much. Stephen, maybe a couple other guys went to the American Embassy. They're over there banging on the doors, trying to find out what's going on. They wouldn't let them in the embassy. They wouldn't even address them.
Back at the compound, some of Jones's most ardent followers have prepared a poison-laced Kool-Aid drink.
It's not Kool-Aid, it's Flavor Aid, a cheap knockoff.
Jones asked family members and mothers to line up with their children first and to administer this potion, a mixture of cyanide, Flavor Aid, and various tranquilizers in a huge vat.
They're going to do the babies and the children. They bring out syringes.
His mistresses and secretaries gave all the children the poison, squirted the poison in their mouth.
Not only were we not there to stand up for them, stand up and maybe stand against my father, but by their understanding of things, we were out killing people.
Mother, 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 please. Mother, please, 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 don't do this, don't do this. Put down your life with it, child, but don't do this.
My mother was standing against my father, trying to fight it, trying to take him on. And when you hear over the loudspeaker, mother, 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 please don't do this, she was resisting and was restrained, trying to steer things away, certainly away from some of the crazy things he was saying and doing, but also away from suicide.
Jones is telling everyone it's painless, it's easy, and of course, death by cyanide is one of the worst possible ways to die. Robs your body of the ability to take in oxygen. And so you froth at the mouth, you go into convulsions, you suffocate it. It takes a while. It's terrible.
So by then, what are parents gonna do? They like, how could you have your child 20 feet away, dying? I mean, he just took whatever possibility of people responding away from them and killed the children.
They don't want it. And Jones is screaming at them.
Lay down your life with dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony.
And the ones who don't want to cooperate are held down and forcibly injected.
There were guards surrounding the perimeter.
A few people try to run for it. 1 or 2 escape. The rest are captured.
We heard, well, they found 300 bodies in Jonestown.
The first number I heard was 400 maybe, and I thought, God, surely you wouldn't take them all.
By Saturday night, there was an eerie quiet in Jonestown. But at the Airstrip, the survivors were struggling to stay alive.
After the shooting, a number of the villagers came out and asked to help us. We had bottles of rum and other spirits to help ease the pain, but there weren't painkillers. I remember saying to Jackie Spear, there's one pain pill here. Do you want it now or do you want it later? And she decided to take it later.
When I awoke some hours later, I was in excruciating pain, more pain than I'd ever experienced in my life. A bunch of Guyanese came and they all carried me to the tent, and that's where I stayed that night.
It was a difficult night. They would come occasionally into the tent where they had me on the Airstrip and give me swigs of Guyanese rum, which is very strong rum. That was the sedative I had.
As daylight approached, Guyanese soldiers arrived and secured the airstrip so that additional medevac planes could come in.
We were 19 hours in the jungle. Guyanese Defense Force came, they had a doctor, and he gave me 2 aspirin. And small planes started coming and they started evacuating the injured back to Georgetown, along with the newspaper reporters.
I had Greg Robinson's camera gear and walked around to a place where I had a vantage point of the plane and the bodies around the plane. And that's the last shot I took.
Larry Layton was taken by villagers to the local jail and held there until the Guyanese Defense Forces came the next day and arrested him. For the surviving temple members in Georgetown, that Saturday night was just as terrifying.
I was in shock, even as I was out wandering, trying to find out what was going on, knowing all the while something terrible was happening, but not knowing what else I could do.
We heard, well, they found 300 bodies in Jonestown.
At dawn, the Guyana Defense Force raided Jonestown. At first, the body count was less than 300. The families in the U.S. and Georgetown hoped that their loved ones would be found alive.
As for Jim Jones himself, they found his body the next day. Only 2 people among the dead in Jonestown didn't die of cyanide poisoning. One was Jim Jones, the other was his personal nurse, Annie Moore.
Yeah, I know Dad was shot in the head. He saw the way everybody else was dying, and he couldn't bring himself to die that horrible death. So he had someone shoot him in the head.
Good evening. Here's what's happening. We're interrupting our special broadcasting to bring you this special report. Bodies are strewn all over the place.
The death toll at Jonestown now stands at 405, but it is rising as more bodies are in fact being found.
I think the first number I heard was like 250, 250, 400 maybe. And I thought, okay, God, surely you wouldn't take them all, you know. And then the next thing I knew, the number had doubled.
Then the U.S. Army came in and found more bodies, children underneath their parents, husbands on top of their wives.
It was years and years of putting up a good front, but every night, all night, devastating dreams. And in the dreams, everyone's alive. And those people that I'd felt I'd failed the most. And every morning I'd wake up and learn all over again they were dead. And so I have to go through that grief again.
You never get over it, you know, you just live with it.
Jim Jones based his own ego on how people responded to him. He got his sense of himself from other people. If you left the church, you were essentially indicating to Jones that you thought he was worthless.
I shall do all the miracles that you said your God would do and never did.
I think Jim was sick. He needed those people around him. He couldn't just go off and die by himself. He needed to take a bunch of people with him.
I maintain to be and declare to be your only savior.
The massacre at Jonestown remains one of the most haunting chapters in American history. On December 6, 1978, survivors in San Francisco filed papers to officially dissolve the People's Temple, ending Jim Jones' twisted vision that mixed self-glorification and social good. There was almost $10 million in the church's accounts and another $1 million in cash and gold found at the Jonestown site. In his will, Jones left most of the money to the Soviet Union. Instead, it was paid out to family members who filed wrongful death claims and for the removal of the bodies from Guyana. 40 years later, nothing remains of Jonestown. Within weeks of the tragedy, the local people tore the place down. I'm Donnie Wahlberg. Thanks for watching Very Scary People.